Hello there. Welcome to the Light Story Club. Settle in and find a comfy spot to relax. Before we get to the story, I would love to know your favorite myths and monsters. Comment where in the world you are and let's begin the story. They say I was born with the sea in my veins. The first thing I remember is the sound of waves, always the waves. They crashed against the cliffs below the temple where I lived with my sisters, Stheno and Uriel. Our home sat high on the edge of the world, draped in the smell of salt and sand, with the sun painting everything gold. I loved it. I loved everything about it, especially the wind. It was wild and free and always knew where it was going. I, however, didn't. In those early days, I was just a girl. Not a monster. Not a curse. Not yet. We were Gorgons, yes, but unlike my sisters, immortal and unyielding, I was born mortal, a flickering candle between two undying stars. Stheno told me I glowed brighter because of that. Uriel said it made me fragile, like a shell that could be crushed underfoot. They both loved me in their own way, fiercely and protectively. But I knew, even then, I was different. I used to watch them wrestle under the moonlight. Their roars echoed across the rocky cliffs like thunder, shaking loose bits of stone that tumbled into the sea below. I would sit with my knees hugged to my chest, hair whipping around my face, watching, wondering what it would be like to be strong like them. Unafraid. Unchanging. Instead, I dreamed. I dreamed of temples with gleaming pillars, of scrolls filled with wisdom, of a world beyond our lonely rock. I dreamed of Athena. Oh, how I admired her then. Her stories came to me like seabirds gliding on the wind, swift, sharp, full of meaning. The goddess of wisdom and war, born from the mind of Zeus himself. I carved her symbol into the flat stones I found on the shore. I whispered to her statue at night. I thought, perhaps, if I prayed hard enough, she might answer. Maybe she'd grant me purpose or at least offer me a glimpse of something more. She didn't answer. But the dreams stayed. By the time I was 12, I had begun wandering the coastline alone. The wind was always at my back, nudging me forward. I found caves where ancient crabs skittered like secrets, and tide pools that shimmered with colors I couldn't name. I spoke to the sea like an old friend. It listened. It always listened. Sometimes I'd find pebbles shaped like hearts or shells that curled like sleeping dragons. I'd collect them in a small pouch that hung from my belt. Uriel laughed at my treasure bag. She didn't understand why I kept things that couldn't fight back. But Stheno would ruffle my hair and say, "Little Medusa and her little magics." I liked to think the world had magic in its quiet things. Not all spells had to shout. One day, I found a mirror. It had washed ashore, tangled in a bit of fishing net. The glass was cracked, but it still held a reflection. When I tilted it toward the sky, it showed a storm brewing miles away, violet clouds twisting like smoke. When I tilted it to my face, I saw a girl who did not quite belong. I had my mother's eyes. Sharp, grey, stormy. My father's mouth. Set like stone. But my face was changing. By 13, I had grown tall and quick. My hair, dark as obsidian, began curling like sea foam whipped by wind. My skin bronzed under the sun. Fishermen who passed our coast in long wooden boats would glance up, their eyes lingering too long. I didn't understand why then. I only knew it made my sisters angry. "You need to stop going down there," Stheno warned one evening. "You're not a child anymore." I bristled. "But I like the beach." "It doesn't matter what you like. The world does not care about our wants. It takes what it wishes." "But I'm not doing anything wrong." "That has never stopped the world before," Uriel said grimly, her voice like stone grinding stone. I didn't understand. Not fully. That night, I sat on the edge of the cliffs, looking down at the sea. The stars were out, burning bright like they were trying to speak. I held my cracked mirror and stared at the reflection of the moon. Then, slowly, I turned it toward myself. What was I becoming? I wished I knew. The wind sighed. The sea whispered. And in the silence, I heard a name, Athena. Like a hush in my bones, a memory I hadn't made yet. I stood and made a promise to the stars. I would find her. I would go to the temple on the mainland, where the marble steps rose into the sky and priests chanted wisdom in the language of gods. I would kneel before her statue and ask for her favor. Not because I was beautiful, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to become something more. Not a child, not a monster, something whole. And so began the journey of Medusa, not the creature in stories, but the girl who walked the shore with a pouch of treasures and dreams shaped like stars. I left before sunrise. I had told no one, not even my sisters. If I had, they would have stopped me, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. I understood that now. There were things in the world that did not look kindly upon a girl who dared to dream beyond her place. I tied my pouch of beach treasures to my belt, packed a skin of water, and wrapped my mirror in cloth. Then I walked into the morning mist, down the worn path that led to the mainland. The world was wider than I had imagined. The cliffs gave way to forests filled with whispering leaves and pale sunlight. I saw birds I had only ever heard, their songs trailing behind me like ribbons. The path twisted past waterfalls, quiet villages, and golden fields where farmers stared as I passed. Some bowed slightly. Others looked away quickly, as if my gaze might burn. It was the first time I saw fear on a stranger's face. It clung to them like a second skin. I didn't understand it. Not yet. But I felt it, and it made me walk a little faster. After days of travel, I came to the great city of Athena's worship. It rose from the earth like a crown of marble and olive branches. Statues lined the wide stone roads, heroes with spears, women with wise eyes, and the great goddess herself, standing above them all. Her face was carved with perfect serenity, but her gaze, her gaze, was piercing. Like she knew every thought before it bloomed. I felt small beneath her gaze. And yet, I burned with hope. I entered the temple barefoot. The floors were cold, slick with ancient polish. Priests in pale robes whispered prayers in corners, their voices soft as feathers. The scent of incense wove through the air, thick with amber and myrrh. I followed it to the altar. There she stood, Athena in stone. Her shield gleamed gold in the candlelight, and her spear was taller than any man. Her eyes looked past everything, even me. I knelt, and I prayed. Goddess of wisdom, I have come to learn. I ask nothing but knowledge. I offer my devotion. I want to become more than what I am. Please. The silence that followed was heavy. And then, to my wonder, a priestess approached. She was older, with silver hair braided tight, and a gaze not unlike Athena's statue. She studied me a long moment, then spoke. "You are the girl from the sea cliffs." I nodded. "Yes. You are mortal." "I am. And you ask for the goddess's favor?" "Yes," I said, steady as I could. She said nothing for a long time. Then she turned and walked. "Come," she said. She led me through the temple, past the sacred pools, past gardens where marble benches sat between olive trees. We came to a library carved into the rock itself, and she handed me a scroll. "Then you shall learn," she said. "If the goddess sees fit to bless you, she will." That's how my temple days began. They were quiet, orderly, filled with words and rituals and aching knees from long hours of kneeling. I learned the names of stars and the riddles of philosophers. I studied the shapes of the world and the rules of the gods. I cleaned the altars. I poured oil. I sang the hymns. I was given a white robe and a cot to sleep on, in a chamber lined with mosaics of owls and spears. It felt like a dream come true. But even dreams have shadows. The other acolytes watched me. First with curiosity, then with coldness. They whispered behind veils. "She's not one of us. Why is she here?" A Gorgon girl pretending to be pure. I tried not to listen. I tried to belong. But belonging is not something you can force. It either blooms, or it doesn't. One day, while cleaning the sacred pool, I caught a reflection in the water. A face, my face. But not quite. My eyes were brighter than they used to be, glowing faintly gold. My hair shimmered as if touched by starlight. And for just a moment, I swore I saw something shift in the water behind me, something coiled and alive. I spun, but nothing was there. That night, I dreamed. Athena stood before me in a storm of feathers and wind. Her face was carved from silence, and her voice, when it came, was the sound of thunder behind closed eyes. "You seek knowledge," she said. "But not all knowledge brings peace." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. "You are of earth and sea. You carry both blessing and burden. The world will not forgive your beauty, Medusa. Not without a price." I woke with her name in my lungs and sweat on my brow. Something had changed. The next day, the stares were sharper, the whispers louder, and in the shadows of the temple halls, I began to feel it, something watching. Not a goddess, not a priestess, something beneath. The reflection came again, this time in polished bronze. My eyes gold, my hair moving, tiny movements, like snakes. But when I reached up to touch it, it was just hair, wasn't it? I began to fear the mirror I once loved. I stopped carrying it. I kept my head down. I walked quietly. I prayed harder. And yet, the changes did not stop. There was a man, a visitor, a noble from some distant court. He came with offerings and too many rings on his fingers. His gaze was heavy. He watched the acolytes as they passed, and when he looked at me, it was like being pierced by flame. He called me divine. He called me exquisite. I called him nothing. But he would not stop. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the temple in gold, he cornered me near the sacred garden. I tried to walk past him. He grabbed my arm. "Don't be cruel, little Gorgon," he hissed. "You walk like a goddess, why pretend otherwise?" His grip tightened. I remember screaming. I remember pushing. And I remember the look on his face when he fell backward, eyes wide, lips trembling, not with pain, with fear. He had seen something. Something behind my eyes. He fled. The priests asked questions. They called it a misunderstanding. He left with curses on his tongue. I was warned. The priestess came to me that night. "You must be careful," she said. "The gods do not look kindly on disturbance." "But I know," she said, gently. "But your presence stirs the air. Things are changing. You must ask yourself, what is it you truly seek here, Medusa?" And I realized I didn't know anymore. I had come for knowledge. But I had found only mirrors I could no longer trust. The temple no longer felt like a sanctuary. There were still days of calm, sunlight spilling through high windows, scrolls that smelled of cedar and ink, the hush of voices speaking sacred things. But underneath it all was a quiet shifting, like stones beginning to slip at the edge of a cliff. I stayed longer in the library, hidden among the shelves. I found comfort in myths, the ones no one liked to read. The forgotten goddesses, the cursed nymphs, the mortals who reached too high. I began to understand the pattern. Beauty was danger. Power invited punishment. Curiosity was a flame too easily snuffed out. I was all three. The dreams came more often now. In them, I wandered through a garden made of bones. Ivy grew over rib cages. Owls circled overhead with glowing red eyes. And always, somewhere in the dream, Athena stood among the shadows, watching, never speaking. One night, the dream changed. This time, I stood in a marble hall that shimmered like starlight. The sky above was endless, no roof, no ceiling, just stars. I was barefoot, alone. The floor beneath me pulsed with warmth, like a heartbeat. A mirror appeared before me, not cracked, not worn. This one was perfect, tall as a man, framed in gold. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. And there she was, me, but older. Her eyes were glowing fully now, no longer soft gold, but blazing like two suns. Her hair writhed with serpents, each one shining like wet obsidian. Her face, my face, was terrible and beautiful. Not monstrous, not twisted, but powerful in a way the world would never forgive. She looked at me. She smiled. And she said, "It has already begun." I woke with a start. The blanket was tangled around my legs. My skin was cold with sweat. I stumbled out of the chamber and ran into the night, out into the temple gardens, where the moon carved silver lines across the stones. The olive trees whispered. The air smelled like rain. I dropped to my knees and whispered into the dirt, "Athena, please. I don't want this. I only wanted to learn. I only wanted to be worthy." There was no answer. Not from the sky. Not from the goddess. Only from within. A faint, slithering sensation stirred at the nape of my neck. I reached up and touched my hair. It was still hair. Mostly. But I could feel the change now. Not every moment. But sometimes, when I was afraid. When I was angry. When I felt alone. It moved. The priestess noticed. She didn't say it aloud, but I saw it in her eyes. I caught her staring when she thought I wasn't looking, watching the way my shadow moved on the wall, listening to the way my voice had changed, deeper, steadier. "Come with me," she said one morning, after prayers. She took me through a side door I had never noticed before, down into the oldest part of the temple, past sealed crypts and forgotten altars, into a chamber that pulsed with silence. "This is the oldest shrine," she said, "built before even Athena's name was carved into stone. There are truths down here. Not all of them kind." I stood very still. "Do you believe you are cursed?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't used to. And now, I looked at my hands, my trembling fingers. "I think something is changing." "It is," she said, not unkindly. "You must understand, Medusa. Not all transformations are punishments. Some are awakenings." I swallowed hard. "Then why am I afraid?" She stepped closer. "Because the world has only ever taught you to fear yourself." Her words struck deep. She left me alone in that chamber, to pray or think or scream. I did all three. By the time I climbed back to the sunlight, I knew something had shifted. I could not pretend any longer. Not to myself. Not to the others. The temple did not want me, not truly. They feared what they did not understand. And I no longer belonged to a life of quiet robes and whispered hymns. That night, I packed my things, just like I had when I left the cliffs. But this time, I didn't walk toward something. I ran from it. From the temple. From the whispers. From the eyes that watched too closely and the mouths that smiled too falsely. The road was dark and dusted in moonlight. I followed it for hours, until the city fell behind me. I didn't stop until the wind changed, until the trees turned to stone. Literally. There was a stretch of land far beyond the temples where statues littered the earth. Some stood proud. Others lay cracked and half-buried. It was said a god once fought a monster here, that the monster's gaze turned men to stone. I sat among those statues and cried, not for myself, but for every creature ever feared, because it was different, because it was strong, because it dared to be something the world did not understand. I stayed in that stone field until dawn. Birds did not sing there. The air was still, and somewhere, deep in the marrow of the earth, something ancient stirred. Not Athena, not a god, something older. It did not speak in words. It hummed through my blood. It said, "Become." I wandered for days. The fields of stone gave way to wild hills where nothing grew in straight lines. The wind carried dust and forgotten prayers, and I no longer searched for temples. I no longer searched for anyone. I walked with my hands in my cloak, my head down, and my name folded tightly inside me like a wound. Sometimes, I passed travelers on the road, traders with camels and horses, mothers carrying baskets of figs, boys with slings and wild eyes. They never spoke to me. Some stared too long. Others turned away. A few crossed themselves and whispered oaths to their gods. One little girl dropped her toy when she saw me and burst into tears. I didn't even say a word, but I saw myself reflected in the puddles after storms. The change was no longer subtle. My hair was alive. Not always, not fully, but enough. When I was startled, it moved. When I was angry, it hissed. Sometimes I woke to find coils resting beside my cheeks like sleeping vines. They were not snakes. Not exactly. They were something else. Something in between. Not all of them had eyes, but the ones that did watched the world like they'd seen it fall before. I tried to cut them once. With a blade I found abandoned at a shrine. They screamed. So did I. Blood dripped from my fingers as the severed ones turned to ash. The pain wasn't just in my scalp, it was in my soul. A howl that came from somewhere far older than my body. I wept for hours beneath the olive trees. I stopped trying to be what I was before. I stopped trying to be anything but what I was becoming. At night, I spoke to the stars. Am I a monster? I asked them. Or something else? They blinked back at me in silence. One night, I came upon a cave. It was carved into the cliffside, half swallowed by ivy, and its mouth yawned like the hollow of a beast. Something inside me stirred at the sight of it. Not fear, not caution, recognition. I stepped inside. The cave was cold and deep, but dry. There were ancient paintings along the walls, symbols of serpents, sun wheels, and women with many eyes. Someone had once lived here. Someone like me. I built a fire from twigs and dry grass. The smoke curled toward the ceiling like a whisper of comfort. This, I thought, could be home. Not a temple. Not a marble hall. Not a place of hymns and judgment. But a place where I could exist without flinching. I made a bed of moss and stones. I carved a shelf for my pouch of treasures. I laid my cracked mirror gently against the wall, and when I stared into it now, I no longer flinched. I saw the truth. I was changing. I had changed. But it was not wrong. One morning, I woke to find the serpents curled in my hair like rings of obsidian. Their scales shimmered in the sunlight. One blinked up at me, slowly, almost lovingly. I did not scream. Instead, I whispered, "Good morning." From then on, I named them. Not all, but a few. The smallest I called Talia, because she seemed to laugh whenever I stumbled. The largest, Arashan, after the girl who once challenged the gods with her weaving. The boldest one, who liked to dart toward birds, I named Eris. They were not pets. They were part of me. And they listened. Oh, how they listened. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way the wind changed when danger approached. The stillness of birds before a storm. The tension in the earth before someone stepped too close. The world was speaking to me, not with words, with vibrations, with scent, with a language I'd never been taught but somehow understood. I wasn't just becoming different. I was becoming aware. One day, a hunter entered the cave. He didn't see me at first. He must have thought it was abandoned. He set down his pack and began inspecting the walls, fingering the carvings. I didn't move. I stood in the shadows, watching. Then he lit a torch, and he saw me. His eyes widened. Not in recognition, but in horror. I stepped into the firelight slowly. "I won't hurt you," I said. But the serpents moved, and he screamed. He reached for his dagger. I backed away, holding up my hands. "Don't," I whispered. "Please, don't." But he didn't listen. He lunged. And in that moment, something ancient rose inside me. I didn't look away. I looked through him. My eyes burned gold. And he stopped mid-step. His skin turned pale, then gray, then stone. His arms froze, still reaching. His mouth, open in a final gasp, became marble. His eyes locked on mine, forever. I stood shaking. Not with triumph, not with grief, but with something in between. I touched his statue. It was warm at first, then cold, then silent. I buried it under rocks, said a prayer for him, for me. The cave was no longer just a shelter now. It was a sanctuary, a boundary, a warning. I carved words above the entrance, in the old tongue, enter with truth or turn to stone. And when the wind blew, it echoed those words like a lullaby made of thunder. I had never known such stillness. The cave was no longer just a hiding place. It had become something sacred, something mine. Ivy crept across the mouth of the stone like curtains, swaying gently in the wind. At night, the stars were sharper here, as if the sky leaned down just a little closer to keep me company. I no longer feared my reflection. Not even in water. Not even when the serpents lifted their heads in greeting. They were a part of me now. The way breath is part of life. They guarded me, yes, but more than that, they understood me. When I wept, they curled gently around my arms. When I laughed, they danced in my hair like ribbons. I spoke to them often, not just with words, but in glances and quiet breath. A conversation deeper than sound. And in the silence, I began to remember things I'd forgotten. My sister's laughter. The feel of sea salt in my curls. The way the wind used to howl across the cliffs, singing to us before we fell asleep. But I also remembered the temple. The eyes that never trusted me. The hands that reached where they should not. The way beauty turned into burden the moment someone else wanted to own it. I had wanted to be holy. I had wanted to be wise. Instead, I had become dangerous. But in the quiet of my cave, with the firelight flickering across the walls and the stars blinking above, I no longer saw danger as a curse. I saw it as power. The first visitors came in spring. A group of boys, hunters, young and loud, with wine-slick laughs and too many blades. They didn't see the sign I carved, or maybe they didn't care. I watched from the shadows as they joked and threw stones at birds. They said they'd heard of a creature that could turn men to stone. They thought it was just a tale. I didn't want to hurt them. I truly didn't. But when they drew their swords and dared each other to go deeper, I stepped into the light. "Leave," I said, my voice steady. "There is nothing for you here." They froze. And then they laughed. One of them stepped forward. So the monster speaks. I warned them again. They didn't listen. When they raised their blades, I raised my eyes. 3 of them turned to stone before the others fled screaming. I marked their statues with olive branches, and wept again, not because I regretted it, but because it had to happen. That summer, I changed further. I no longer felt hunger the way I used to. I no longer tired like other mortals. My blood cooled. My skin grew tougher. My hearing sharpened. I could hear mice in the grass outside the cave. I could smell a lie from 10 paces. It frightened me at first. But then I remembered what the priestess had said, not all transformations are punishments. Some are awakenings. I was awake now, more than I had ever been. One evening, just after the sky turned gold and violet, I heard footsteps. Not rushing, not stumbling. Calm, measured. A woman. Alone. She wore a black cloak and carried no blade. Her hair was bound in braids, and her eyes were the color of dying embers. She stopped at the edge of my cave, and waited. I stayed in the shadows. You're her, she said. The one with the gaze. I said nothing. She reached into her cloak and removed a bundle wrapped in red cloth. I brought an offering. She placed it gently on the stones. Then she stepped back. I waited until she left before I approached. Inside the cloth, figs, honey, and a small carved figure of a woman with snakes for hair. Me. It was crude, but careful. A gift, not of fear, of respect. That was the beginning. More offerings came in time. Bread, oil, little trinkets, pieces of carved bone shaped into protective charms. They were left at the mouth of the cave. Never with a name, never with a request, only with silence. As if these strangers had found something in me they couldn't find in the temples. A warning, a comfort, a goddess they didn't dare name. I did not think myself divine, but I had become something other, something outside the world's rules. I did not ask for worship, but when the wind carried whispers of my name into the cave, soft voices praying for vengeance, justice, or simply strength, I did not turn away. The world had called me a monster, so I became one. But not the kind they feared. I became one that watched, one that waited, one that would never bow again. At night, I dreamed no longer of temples or gold-robed priestesses. I dreamed of thunder beneath the sea, of wings made of stone, of a girl who had once tried to be holy and instead became free. The seasons passed slowly in the hills beyond the world. I marked time by the growth of moss along the cave walls and by the offerings left at my doorstep, figs in summer, chestnuts in fall, frost-covered lavender in the deep hush of winter. I no longer counted days in prayers or temple bells. I counted in silence, in the hush between stars, in the steady beat of my own breath. I did not age the way I used to. My skin stayed smooth and cold like marble, my limbs strong and tireless. I dreamed less, but when I did, the dreams were deeper. No longer nightmares of fleeing temples or cracking mirrors, but of oceans swallowing cities, of women with serpent crowns seated on thrones of basalt. I always woke from those dreams with the sense that I had been shown something real, something ancient. The cave grew into more than shelter. I shaped the space with my hands, smoothed the walls, widened the tunnel, carved alcoves for offerings and altars. I shaped a place where no one could enter without meaning. And slowly, I began to bring the statues out. The ones who had fallen by my gaze, frozen men with swords half-raised, mouths still curled in surprise or terror. I did not leave them crumbling in the corners of the world. I placed them with care in the clearing near my cave. I stood them in quiet poses among the ivy and poppies, their eyes turned to the sun. And in time, that field became known as the Stone Garden. I did not name it. Others did. Pilgrims began to come more often. Not in groups, but in ones and twos. Some left offerings and fled. Others knelt for hours, saying nothing. They called me many things: Gorgon, guardian, curse, saint. I listened without speaking. It was not my job to correct them. They needed to name what they feared, or loved, or both. That was their right. But what mattered to me was that they came not with swords, but with quiet. One girl, no more than 12, came barefoot, her feet cut from walking too far. She held a rag doll in one hand and a handful of salt in the other. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She bowed. "He hurt my sister," she said, and left the salt on the stones. I never learned her name. But a week later, I heard whispers on the wind of a man found turned to stone at the edge of the forest. Hands still reaching, face frozen in a silent snarl. I never left my cave. I never sought him. But the serpents had. I began to wonder what I was becoming. Not just a guardian. Not just a monster, but an answer. People came with pain they could not speak aloud. And I became the shape of justice they could not find in the temples. There were no hymns written for me, but I heard prayers anyway, in the way footsteps softened when they approached, in the way tears were buried in the dirt with my name on their lips. One day, a boy came. No older than I'd been when I first entered Athena's temple. He stood just past the tree line, trembling. He didn't speak, just watched. He held a lyre in his hands, its strings worn thin. I stepped out, the serpents shifting slowly in my hair. He didn't run. He didn't bow. He just played. A soft song, tender, aching, like water dripping through stone. I listened until the last note fell quiet. "Why are you here?" I asked. He shrugged. "They said you were terrifying. I wanted to know what truth sounded like." He left without another word. But that night, I dreamed of music echoing through the cliffs, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not all who came were kind. A warlord once sent 6 men to claim the cave and tame the Gorgon. I turned 4 to stone before the others begged for their lives. I spared them. But I marked the rocks with their names. They never returned. The more the world spoke of me, the less I resembled the girl who once knelt in a marble hall praying for wisdom. That girl was gone. Not in sorrow, but in growth. She had burned away, like fog in the morning sun. In her place was something older, wilder, not cruel, but clear. I would not be owned. I would not be touched without welcome. I would not be spoken over. The wind carried rumors to my cave now. I heard tales of Athena's temples cracking, of statues weeping blood, of a new fear rising among the priests, not of gods, but of goddesses they could not control. And always, whispered among it all, was my name. Medusa. The one who watches. The one who remembers. The one who waits. I did not ask for vengeance. I did not ask for worship. I only asked to be left alone, and when I was not, I answered in stone. And yet, somehow, that silence became a song. One sung by frightened hands and broken voices. And they sang it not in fear of me, but through me. I had become their mirror. Not all of them liked what they saw. I began to recognize the footsteps before I ever saw the faces. Each set of feet told its own story. The heavy clatter of warriors, the slow tread of pilgrims, the hesitant shuffle of the lost. Some days, I met them at the edge of the garden. Other days, I let them come closer. My serpents always sensed them before I did. Eris would raise her head with a sharp twitch. Talia would hum like wind in a flute. Arashan would rest still and poised, watching, waiting. My sisters, in all but blood. One morning, before the sun had risen past the hills, a woman arrived in silence. She was cloaked in dark wool, her hair streaked with silver, and her hands carried no offerings. But her face was made of grief. She stopped at the first statue, a hunter with a jagged scar across one cheek, his arm mid-reach, his mouth forever open in that moment before fear turns to begging. She traced his jaw with shaking fingers. "You turned him to stone," she whispered. I stepped from the shadows, slow and quiet. "He came with steel," I said. "He left with silence." The woman didn't scream or flee. She looked at me, truly looked, past the serpents, past the myth, past the horror etched into every story they told. "He was my son," she said. "He was cruel. I told him not to go. He didn't listen. I said nothing." Sometimes, there was no balm for truth. She knelt there for hours. When she left, she placed a single daffodil at the statue's feet. Not all who visited me left with pain. Some left with lighter hearts. They came to lay down burdens that temples refused to carry. One old man came every new moon with a satchel of herbs and a quiet song. He never spoke, just sat by the mouth of the cave, sang to the sky, and left. I never learned his name. But on the night he did not come, I felt it. The serpents stirred restlessly. The fire would not catch. The stars dimmed, just slightly. The wind no longer knew his steps. Loss has many faces. I had begun to know them all. In the quiet stretches between visitors, I read the carvings left on my cave walls, messages in chalk, scratches in the stone, symbols drawn in ash. Some were names. Some were prayers. Some were curses. I never erased them. They were part of the place now, like moss, like breath. They told of a world that still spun, with or without me, full of wounds and wishes and regrets too heavy to carry alone. One day, a priestess arrived. Not in robes of gold, but in rags the color of ash. Her eyes were hollow, and her left arm hung limp at her side. She walked as if the ground itself might crumble beneath her. I watched her for a long time before I approached. "Why have you come?" I asked. "To see if you were real," she said. "Am I what you imagined?" She laughed, a soft, broken sound. "No. You are far more than a story." She sat at the edge of the cave and told me her tale. Once, she had served at a temple of Apollo, praised for her voice, her beauty, her obedience. Then she had refused a nobleman. Just once. And the gods did not protect her. She had run. Walked for weeks. Followed whispers that led her to me. "You are the only one," she said, "that makes them afraid." She stayed for a season. Helped me carve bowls from stone, wove dried vines into wind chimes, sang lullabies to the statues in the garden. Her name was Naira, and she did not flinch when my serpents curled close. She spoke to them as if they were children. When she left, she kissed my forehead. "Keep watching," she said. "There are still so many who need you." After she was gone, the cave felt colder. But not empty. She had carved a symbol above the entrance before she left, a simple eye, crowned with stars. It stayed there, glowing faintly in the moonlight, as if her faith still lingered. I was no longer alone, even when I stood in silence. The world was beginning to shift. Whispers became stories. Stories became songs. Not all were kind. But not all were cruel, either. Some called me the Serpent Queen. Some, the Stoneheart Oracle. But a few, just a few, called me sister. And that was enough. The past never stays buried. It lingers in the roots of old thoughts, in the curve of a remembered voice, in the ghost of who you used to be. I thought I had left the temple behind, its cold marble, its hollow prayers, the judgment that hung like incense in the air. But one afternoon, when the wind shifted east and carried the scent of myrrh, I knew something had changed. The rustle of leaves carried footsteps too familiar, too precise. I stepped out of my cave and saw them at the edge of the clearing, 3 temple acolytes, cloaked in white and gold, marked by Athena's sigil. They stood as if trying not to breathe, as if the statues around them might whisper secrets into their ears. The tallest stepped forward. Medusa. His voice was smooth, but rehearsed. "We come from the high temple at Pallas. The priests wish to offer clemency." I said nothing. He continued. "They believe your exile has served its course. You may return. We can offer sanctuary, healing, perhaps even a way to undo what has been done." The serpents stirred. They did not hiss, not yet, but their movements were slow and wary. My gaze did not soften. "You think I want to be healed?" He faltered. "We only wish to restore balance." "You never wished for balance," I replied, voice low. "Only control." The boy behind him, younger, thinner, glanced at the statues. Did they all deserve it? "They came with weapons," I said. "None came to listen." The tall one shifted uncomfortably. "The goddess does not hold your actions against you, but she commands the temple. If you do not return with us willingly, the next one sent will not be acolytes." I looked past him, to the horizon. Clouds were gathering, low and gray. "Then send them. Let them learn what happens when they threaten something they never tried to understand." They left soon after. Not with threats, not with reverence, but with confusion. They did not know what to make of me. I did not cry or scream or beg. I stood still, quiet, unshaken. And when they disappeared beyond the trees, I returned to the garden. One of the statues, a woman I had never known, seemed to smile. That night, I dreamed of the temple, but it was broken. Ivy crawled over the altars. The statues of Athena lay crumbled on the floor, and at the center of the ruined sanctuary stood a mirror, tall and cracked. I walked toward it. My reflection stared back. Not monstrous, not divine, just a girl with tired eyes and coiled serpents that no longer feared their own shadow. I woke before dawn. The cave was still. The fire had gone cold. I sat in the dark and waited for the stars to fade. I remembered how I used to pray when I was young, asking for purpose, for favor, for a sign. But the gods had given me no answers. Only silence, and then, a curse disguised as protection. I no longer prayed, but I did listen. To the wind, to the earth, to the beat of my own heart. That was all I needed now. By the next moon, more came. Not priests, but warriors. 7 of them. They wore iron helms and thick leather. They did not knock. They did not speak. They charged into my garden and drew steel. I met them before they reached the entrance. My eyes were calm. My hands did not shake. 5 fell within moments. Their bodies frozen mid-lunge, their blades still glinting in the sun. The 6th dropped his sword and covered his face. The 7th fled. I let them go. I spent the evening placing the new statues among the others. I did not do it out of cruelty. I did it out of order, out of truth. Let the world see them not as heroes, but as warnings. That night, lightning split the sky. The rain came hard and sudden, soaking the earth and hissing against the stones. I stood in it until I could not feel the cold anymore. The serpents curled around me, sheltering my face, murmuring their strange, wordless comfort. I was not the girl they once cast out. I was something else now. I was stillness before a storm. I was fury carved in flesh. I was the end of lies and the beginning of remembering. The world outside my cave was shifting. I could feel it in the wind, in the weight of the clouds, in the nervous footsteps of those who came through the forest. The stories they whispered of me were growing stranger, more tangled with fear and awe. They spoke of a sorceress who turned armies to stone, of a creature whose voice could steal your soul, of a queen with venom for blood. I never denied these stories. Sometimes, the truth is too quiet to be believed unless dressed in myth. Let them believe what gave them reason to keep their distance. It was late autumn when the pilgrim arrived, just as the leaves were turning brittle and the trees whispered in dry sighs. He came alone, wearing nothing but a grey cloak and sandals worn thin. He had no weapons, no satchel, no torch. He walked into the stone garden as if it were a sacred place, and sat cross-legged in front of one of the older statues, a mother, holding a child frozen in time. He said nothing, did nothing. He simply sat a day. I watched him from the shadows for hours. On the second day, he remained. No food, no water. He only bowed his head and traced lines in the dirt. On the third day, I approached. The serpent stirred but made no threat. I stood before him, quiet. "Why are you here?" I asked. He looked up slowly. His eyes were soft, the color of river stones. "To listen," he said. "To what?" "To the silence between the stories." It was not the answer I expected. He did not flinch when he looked at me. He saw the serpents, the hollow of my eyes, the shadows wrapped around my skin. But he didn't see a monster. He saw a question. I sat across from him. The air between us was heavy with the scent of damp stone and falling leaves. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, as dusk began to fall, he told me his tale. He had once been a healer in a distant city, revered for his skill, called upon by nobles and beggars alike. But when a wealthy child died under his care, though no fault of his own, they blamed him. They took his home, his name, his peace. He wandered for years, ashamed to speak, afraid to heal. "I lost the voice I used to trust," he said. "And the gods said nothing." I nodded. "They rarely do." "I heard of you," he said. "How you see truth others cannot bear." I thought, maybe, if I sat here long enough, I might learn how to live with silence. I said nothing. Not because I had no reply, but because he already understood. There was no lesson I could give him greater than the one he had given himself by surviving. He stayed for 5 days. We spoke little, shared small fires. He sang to the stars once, a song with no words, just long hums that trembled like wind in deep caves. On the 6th morning, he rose, pressed his palm to the stone hand of the mother statue, and walked away. He left no offerings, no name, only a quiet peace that lingered in the garden for weeks after. Visitors came and went with more regularity now. Some brought gifts, salted fish, amber beads, scraps of poetry. Others brought nothing but questions they couldn't ask anywhere else. I didn't always answer, but I listened. That alone seemed to be enough for most. And still, the temple did not forget me. I found their marks carved into trees, burned into stones. A warning or a promise, I couldn't tell. But the message was clear. They were not done with me. One evening, I sat by the fire, sharpening a stone blade, when Eris, my most restless serpent, raised her head sharply. The others stilled. I heard it then too, footsteps, but strange. Not heavy like soldiers, not soft like pilgrims. Measured, deliberate. I stood and stepped outside. At the edge of the garden stood a woman, cloaked in silver, her face hidden beneath a veil. She held a staff, tall and slender, topped with an owl carved of ivory. My heart tightened. I knew who she was before she spoke. "Medusa," the woman said, her voice sharp as bronze, "the world has changed in your absence." I stared at her. "I have not been absent. Only unwelcome. Athena has spoken," she said. She sees what you have become. She offers you an audience. I laughed. Not cruelly, not bitterly, but like a river finally breaking through ice. Now she wants to see me. She wishes to understand what she created. I was never created, I said, stepping forward. Only cursed. Then I made myself. The priestess tilted her head. Come to the temple. Speak your truth. I've spoken it already, I replied. The stones remember. She said no more. She turned and vanished into the trees, as quiet as mist. I watched the place where she stood long after she had gone. For the first time in years, the air felt like a question I had not answered. The gods were stirring, and they had remembered my name. I didn't sleep the night the silver-veiled priestess left. I lay with my eyes open, watching the faint glow of starlight flicker across the walls of the cave. The serpents were uneasy. They twisted restlessly against my shoulders, murmuring in low hisses and coils. I tried to comfort them, but I could feel it too. Something pulling at the edges of the world, soft and invisible, like the hush before thunder. The priestess had said Athena wanted to understand. But gods do not seek understanding. They seek order, control, power preserved in the shape they find most convenient. I had seen enough of their justice to know what kind of mercy they offered. Still, the invitation hung over me like mist. I could ignore it, pretend it meant nothing. But deep within me, the girl I once was stirred. The one who once walked temple steps barefoot, carrying offerings, whispering hope to empty statues. By morning, I made my choice. I would not go to Athena, but I would speak to her. The way I always had, through silence, through truth, through the garden of memory I had built from stone and sorrow. I spent days preparing. I cleared vines from the statues, scrubbed moss from their feet, burned dried herbs so the scent would carry to whatever gods still had ears. I carved names into the earth. Names of those the temple had forgotten, cast out, punished for loving the wrong way, for speaking too loudly, for surviving things no one dared acknowledge. I remembered them all. And at the center of the garden, I placed a new statue. It was unlike the others, not a person frozen in fear or fury. This one I had shaped myself from the rocks near the stream, molded by hand and patience. It was a woman standing tall, her arms outstretched, her face calm. Her eyes were open. Her mouth slightly parted as if speaking a word just out of reach. She wore no crown, bore no sword. She was not goddess or monster, just a figure holding space. When it was done, I lit a circle of small flames around her base and stood in the center. This is what I became, I said aloud. Not because of you, but in spite of you. The flames hissed. The wind grew still. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled. I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. You called me cursed, I whispered. But I learned to bless myself. Nothing answered. Not at first. But that night, in my sleep, I dreamed again. I stood not in my cave, but on the steps of the old temple, the one I once served, now crumbling, ivy strangled, forgotten. Athena stood at the altar. She wore no helm. Her face was young, expression unreadable. I did not bow. You are angry, she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. I looked at her and said, I was broken. She stepped closer, her shadow stretching behind her like a blade. I gave you protection. You gave me silence, I said. You gave me fear. You survived. I rebuilt myself, I corrected. You let them destroy me, and I survived despite you. She said nothing. Her eyes held centuries, but no apology. Why are you here? I asked her. To see, she replied. If you've become more than a warning. And what do you see? Her gaze lingered on me. A mirror. Then I woke. My breath was shallow. The fire had gone out. The cave was cool and quiet. But in the garden, one of the statues had changed. Not crumbled. Not broken. Changed. A soft bloom of moss curled around its hand, where before there had been none. A lizard rested beneath its foot. Life had found its way there, small and stubborn. The world was listening. Not the gods, maybe, but something older. Something true. In the weeks that followed, fewer warriors came. Fewer pilgrims, too. But the ones who came stayed longer. Some left carvings, others left stories. A girl barely older than I had been once left a ribbon of blue silk with her name stitched into it. For protection, she'd written. From those who call girls dangerous just for being brave. I tied it to a stone by the cave entrance, and it fluttered in the wind for days. I had once believed the garden was a place of endings. But now I saw it was becoming something else. A beginning. The garden had settled into a quiet rhythm, like the slow breathing of the earth itself. The statues stood in their silent vigil, bathed in soft sunlight and moonlight, shadows weaving their own stories between stone and leaf. The serpents had grown calmer, almost protective of the sacred space we had made together, me and the memories, me and the stones, me and the stillness that had become a kind of peace. But peace is fragile. It is never as simple as a soft breeze or a clear sky. One evening, as the last colors of sunset bled into the horizon, a new sound came drifting on the wind, a voice, distant but steady, carried from beyond the trees. It was a song. Not like the pilgrim's quiet humming, but a melody sharp and haunting, echoing like a thread pulled taut through the air. It wrapped around me, pulling at the edges of memory, tugging me toward a place I thought I had left behind. I followed the voice through the forest, the serpents writhing with restless energy at my heels. The song grew louder, a woman's voice weaving stories into notes, stories of love and loss, of gods who forgot and mortals who remembered, of shadows that danced beneath the light. At the edge of a clearing stood a woman, her hair the color of autumn leaves, eyes glinting with a wildfire. She held a lyre, strumming the strings with fingers that seemed to glow with magic. Her gaze found mine, steady and unafraid. "You are Medusa," she said softly. "I have heard the whispers." "And who are you?" I asked, wary but curious. "Call me Callista," she replied. "A wanderer, a teller of tales, a keeper of truths lost and found." We sat together as the stars blinked awake, the song weaving between us like a thread binding old wounds to new hopes. She spoke of places beyond the forest, of cities where gods still walked among men, where stories shaped the very fabric of reality. She spoke of balance, the fragile dance between light and shadow, mercy and justice, silence and voice. "You carry a story that must be told," Callista said. "Not as a curse, but as a song of survival." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a cloak. "I have tried to be silent. But silence is not always peace," she replied. "Sometimes it is a prison." We stayed with the fire until dawn, sharing pieces of ourselves in the language of music and memory. When she left, she placed a small charm in my hand, a simple stone carved with a single word, voice. "Use it when the silence grows too heavy," she said. "When the past threatens to swallow you whole." I returned to the cave with the charm tucked close to my heart. That night, the garden seemed alive with whispers, soft, urgent, like the breath of the earth itself. The statues no longer felt cold. They felt watched, remembered, honored. For the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of hope. Not because the gods had changed, not because the world was kinder, but because I had found my voice. And sometimes, that was enough. Days stretched into weeks, and the garden grew with them. Not just in stone and shadow, but in something deeper. Life stirring quietly beneath the cracked earth, beneath the serpent's scales, beneath the weight of forgotten curses. The statues, once frozen in fear or fury, seemed to breathe with a new pulse, as if the stories carved into their faces were no longer wounds but woven threads in a larger tapestry. I wandered through the garden at dawn, the cool air full of dew and promise. My fingers traced the edges of a newly sculpted figure. This one not carved by my hands, but by a traveler who had come seeking answers. A man who had seen more battles than stars, who left his pain frozen in stone beside those who had come before him. I paused at the center, where my own statue stood, arms outstretched, eyes open, mouth silent but full of meaning. I had named her the Witness. She was not a goddess, nor a monster. She was the garden's heart. The serpents coiled softly at my feet. "They come," Eris hissed gently. I knew what she meant. The winds had shifted again. Whispers had reached the temple. Athena's shadow was growing longer. That afternoon, the earth trembled beneath my feet. The trees bent as if bowing to an unseen force. And then, from the forest's edge, came a procession, figures cloaked in deep blue, faces hidden beneath hoods, moving with the quiet dignity of priests and judges. At their head walked a woman, not the silver-veiled priestess of before, but someone older, colder, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She carried no staff, only a scroll sealed with the emblem of Athena. "Medusa," she said, voice like the snap of winter branches. "The goddess offers a final chance. Return to the temple. Lay down your curse. Accept her judgment." I met her gaze without flinching. "And if I refuse, then the price will be paid in stone and blood." The serpents hissed. The air thickened. But I did not speak. Instead, I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I am no one's prisoner. Not of gods, not of men. I am the sum of every wound they gave me and every truth I reclaimed. If judgment is what you seek, come claim it." They paused, surprise flickering behind their eyes. Then the woman nodded once and motioned to her companions. They did not draw weapons, but their presence was a warning. I returned to the garden's heart and touched the stone figure. "This is where I stand," I said. Not in fear, but in defiance. Night fell, and the garden hummed with quiet power. The statues seemed to listen, their faces turned toward the moon. The serpents coiled tightly, guarding, waiting. I closed my eyes and let the silence fill me, not the silence of exile, but the silence of strength. Tomorrow, the gods would come. But tonight, I was home. The dawn broke pale and uncertain, as if the world itself hesitated to witness what was to come. I stood in the heart of the garden, the cool morning air weaving through my serpents like a soft breeze. The statues around me, witnesses carved from grief and memory, caught the faint light, their stone eyes eternal and unblinking. They had seen centuries of pain, centuries of silence. Today, they would see defiance. The procession arrived just as the sun crept over the trees, the blue-cloaked figures moving with measured steps. The woman who led them held her scroll tightly, her eyes sharp, the promise of divine authority burning in their depths. But I was no longer the frightened girl who had once trembled beneath their gaze. I was the storm they had summoned, the silence they had tried to bury. "Medusa," the woman said, voice cold and commanding, "you stand accused of blasphemy against the gods, of turning mortals to stone, of rebellion against divine order. Surrender now, or be cast into eternal imprisonment." I stepped forward, meeting her gaze steadily. I was cursed by gods who feared what I might become. I did not choose this form, but I have chosen my own fate. The air thickened with tension, but I did not waver. My serpents hissed softly, their movements slow and deliberate, ready to protect. The statues around me seemed to hum with a quiet power, as if the stones themselves were alive with ancient defiance. "Then let judgment be passed," I said. "But know this, I am not the monster you seek. I am the truth you refuse to see." The blue cloaks faltered for a moment, uncertainty flickering across their faces. And then the leader raised her hand, signaling the priests to advance. But before they could move, a sudden wind swept through the garden, stirring leaves and carrying whispers. The statues glowed faintly, their stone eyes shimmering with something like life. The pilgrims froze, fear creeping into their ranks. I felt it too, the ancient magic, the deep pulse beneath the earth. The garden was not just stone and shadow. It was a living memory, a sanctuary for the forgotten and the broken. It was my home. The woman's voice cracked as she called out a prayer to Athena, but it faltered in the rising wind. The statues around us began to glow brighter, and for a moment, the air shimmered with the impossible. The stones seemed to breathe, to shift, to speak. The procession scattered, their confidence broken. The leader stayed, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Medusa," she whispered, "what are you?" I smiled softly, the serpents calming around me. "I am the silence turned to song, the shadow turned to light. I am the voice beneath the stone." She stepped back, nodding slowly, as if understanding more than she ever had before. The garden settled again, the statues returning to their stillness, but the world had changed. I was no longer just a story told in fear. I was a living truth, complex, fierce, unyielding. And as the sun climbed higher, I stood tall in the garden's heart, knowing that tomorrow held new challenges, but tonight I was free. The night after the confrontation, the garden was quieter than it had ever been. The stars hung low and soft, like lanterns guiding travelers home. The statues, those silent watchers carved from memory and grief, seemed to hold their breath beneath the moon's tender gaze. I sat among them, feeling the slow, steady pulse of the earth beneath my fingers, the serpents curling gently around my shoulders as if sensing the calm after the storm. The world had shifted, not because the gods had changed their minds, nor because the curses had lifted, but because I had found something they could not take away, myself. The girl I had been, the one who dreamed beneath olive trees, who believed in kindness and justice, was still here, woven into every scale and shadow that had become my new skin. I thought of Callista, the wanderer who taught me that my story was not a curse but a song. I thought of the garden, which had become a place not of exile, but of belonging, a sanctuary where the broken were seen and the silenced found voice. Morning came slowly. The first rays of sun spilled across the stones, turning cold marble into warm gold. I stood at the garden's edge, feeling the light wrap around me like an old friend. The serpents stirred, catching the light in their scales, shimmering like living jewels. I whispered a farewell to the statues, to the garden that had been my prison and my home. "This is not the end," I said. "It is a beginning." And as I walked toward the horizon, toward whatever awaited beyond the edges of myth and shadow, I carried with me the truth I had forged from stone and silence. That no matter how deep the night, dawn always comes. That no matter how heavy the curse, love and hope can break even the hardest stone. And that I, Medusa, was more than a monster. I was a story still unfolding. Thank you for listening to this light story. If you enjoyed this lovely tale, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Light Story Club will be here for when you want to listen to another chronicle to help you rest. Goodbye for now.